fantastic to hear all the work that Vodafone's doing. And as a Vodafone employee myself, it's one of the things I'm most proud of. I've been at Vodafone for 24 years, and we've been in this space for a long time supporting people. And it's really inspirational, the work that you lead, Claudine, personally, within the company. So I'm Lisa Felton. I'm the director of the Vodafone Foundation. And I'm really pleased to be talking to you today and leading this panel of amazing experts and friends that we've been working with in this space for quite some time. And we'll be talking about Bright Sky and how this can help all of you incorporate this as a tool within your domestic abuse toolkits. Technology is something that is woven into everything we do today, and how we work, how we play, how we live. And it can be negative, but there's also a very positive side to it as well. Almost half the population worldwide now owns a mobile phone. And this means that we can put tools into the hands of all of those people that help and support them. And the mission of the Vodafone Foundation is very much to connect for good, to use our technology and our charitable giving to make a difference. We've worked in the space of domestic abuse for over 15 years, and we've tackled it in many ways using technology, from using technology to provide emergency response to those at highest risk with tools that have now been rolled out over several countries, to moving into the space of trying to prevent domestic abuse and helping people take that first step with apps like Bright Sky and with our awareness campaigns. And as Claudine said, our awareness campaigns is actually something I'm most proud of, because it starts to give people the words to use, the language to use, to recognize what is happening to them and to help them take that first step, because it becomes normalized in the language of the organization. Patrick, could you tell us a little bit about Bright Sky and what it is?
Thank you. I'm going to go back a decade. And at that point at Hestia, we were reflecting on the feedback that we'd had from survivors who'd come to live in our refuges. And they told us 4 things. In amongst a lot of feedback, there were 4 things they told us. And the first 2 of those were not new. Anybody who'd worked in the sector had heard the first 2 of these before. And the first was that actually, while experiencing domestic abuse, they didn't have a name for it. And the second was they didn't know that any help was available. The second 2 things they told us was newer, and maybe it shouldn't have been, but it was. And one was that when they were first looking for support or information, they looked in this digital space. And then finally, that there wasn't very much available when they did that. And so what we decided to do was to create some kind of resource. And that was an incredibly courageous, and I say courageous in the brave sense of the word, because we're a service delivery charity. You know, digital apps is way beyond our competence. And as chief exec, I'm a Luddite. So, you know, the idea that we would create a digital tool was pretty ambitious. But we wanted that tool to do 3 things. We wanted it to provide information where people were looking for it, to raise awareness, and to help guide victims and survivors to safety. We launched Bright Sky in 2016, so 8 years ago now. We've had 161,000 downloads. It's a lot of people who have used Bright Sky. Initially, it was a partnership between Hestia and a US-based company, tech company called Aspirant, just through relationships. That's how some of the best things happen. And since then has been hugely supported by Vodafone to scale, to promote, and to raise awareness. So that's kind of a potted history of how Bright Sky came to be.
Can you tell us about some of its features?
So Bright Sky has there are 3 audiences for which Bright Sky was created. So the first are victims and survivors, and in its early iterations, because we're on iteration 4 or 4.B now, it was very much victims and survivors. That's who the app was created for. Who it's aimed at now has expanded out. It's still for victims and survivors, but it's been expanded out. It's for friends and family, and for professionals and employers. It has 7 key features, or 7 that I'll mention today. It's got a cover mode, so it can be used discreetly. That has recently been enhanced, so there's also a notice to alert anyone using it to the dangers of having Bright Sky on their phone, which has to be acknowledged. If someone identifies as being in the first group, so a victim or survivor, there's a guided safety review, which will help somebody to consider safety and what they might need. There are questionnaires with information to help people identify what's going on. There is diary functionality to record evidence. There is the first directory, the first that I know, and I keep claiming this, the first directory, national directory of domestic abuse services. And I'm really thrilled because this week we are adding to that with every London local authority, and Hestia is primarily a London-based service, but we will expand this out, runs an out-of-hours crisis mental health service with open access. And what we do know is that victims and survivors will often present at health services seeking help for that aspect of the impact. And so giving people awareness of these services, which are in every London borough, feels like a next step forward. There's a section for friends and family, and then there is a specific workplace section which is currently being tested. And that focuses on actually what are the signs to spot at work. How do you have a conversation around domestic abuse where you suspect that somebody might be a victim at work? What do you do where there's a disclosure at work? In the same way that Vodafone outlined how to take care of yourself if you're the one in that situation. Lots of guidance, lots of advice.
And how have you seen other companies use it as a workplace tool?
I think what we've seen is, so employers who have embraced Bright Sky, I think have embraced a number of principles. And the first of those is that a disclosure is an act of courage. And starting from that point, if somebody discloses, it's an act of courage. And that their responsibility as an employer is to raise awareness and reduce stigma. And actually, if they can create an environment in which those acts of courage can take place. I think the other principles are ensuring that everybody has the information, has the skills to have appropriate conversations right across the workforce, because colleague to colleague can often be as effective, and the opportunity to have those as manager to employee. And then I think the other piece in terms of principles has been that we don't have to be experts, but there are experts like Everyone's Business and others around whom we can draw on. And two recent examples, the two examples that come to mind is Starbucks have recently, following a training day with the entire team at their head office, have put Bright Sky on everybody's phone. But they've put it on also as a way of encouraging employees to spot the signs, to be aware, to have conversations with their colleagues, not just as a management tool. And then secondly, EY, who embraced Bright Sky probably 8 years ago when it was first launched. And I think what EY have done really successfully around Bright Sky is they've held on to it as this is not something you do and tick a box once. You have to come back to again and again and again. So you have webinars, you have poster campaigns, you keep the conversation very live.
Thank you. We've got many global businesses in the room. Phoebe, could you talk a little bit about why we've taken Bright Sky beyond the UK and where we've rolled it out to?
Yeah, I mean, domestic abuse is not something that is confined to the borders of the UK. So it is a global issue, and in that we should be meeting need. We have seen through Bright Sky in the UK the role that technology can play in facilitating conversations and facilitating survivors to reach support sooner. And it really wasn't a question of should we roll out, it was how are we going to do this? How are we going to meet as many countries as possible, first of all within kind of the Vodafone network, to make sure that we are reaching survivors everywhere and supporting everyone to have these conversations that Patrick is talking about, and making sure that everyone has access to education and specialist support and practical tips of how to have these conversations, because whilst we still have a long way to go in the UK, we are definitely in a place where there is far more access to resources. People are far more willing to have these conversations. And in a lot of the countries that we have rolled out to, and hopefully will continue to, they are making movements but still need that additional support. And Bright Sky and technology really puts it in people's hands, at their fingertips, wherever they are. And that is what is so important to breaking down those barriers for survivors. It is how do they reach this education to better understand how to spot the signs, and how do I as a friend or colleague know the right things to say so I don't become a barrier to those survivors reaching support. So for us, rolling out Bright Sky just made sense, and ultimately we are now in 12 countries, 13 including the UK. There are 23 different languages across those markets, and it is predominantly in Europe. We actually have our Czech team in the audience somewhere, I don't know where, there. If you want to speak with them about it. But then also in the USA last year we launched, and in South Africa we're looking to reach more countries within Africa as well, and New Zealand. So just really one country at a time, trying to reach more and more people by using technology.
Thank you. And are there any cultural nuances that you'd like to draw out in terms of how we roll out the app?
Yeah, I mean, every Bright Sky rollout is steeped within cultural nuance, because there are many things. Domestic abuse, sort of across the board, we understand how that manifests, and that really doesn't change country by country, but there are so many nuances, whether that be the way that we speak about domestic abuse, whether we call it domestic abuse or domestic violence, or indeed in other countries, different things to that. Yeah. It is so important that when a survivor or a person picks up Bright Sky, whether it be on their phone or whether it be kind of going onto our website, that they go to that and they understand that that information is written for them. There is nothing more isolating than reading a bit of information that feels like it was written for someone in a completely different country. So partnership really is at the core of Bright Sky, and what we do is we create teams, starting with the local Vodafone Foundation, and then we gather government ministries, specialists in the country. In some areas, we also have the police involved as well, and we come together and we localise every single part of Bright Sky, from the risk assessments through to the forms of abuse, through to how to have those conversations, so that when people pick up Bright Sky, they are really able to support someone within the context of their country, and in that make a far more a deeper impact to that survivor that they're supporting.
Thank you. Elizabeth, Bright Sky is a very practical tool. I know you're very keen on a whole of workplace approach to address this problem. How do you see Bright Sky forming part of this, and what else do you think corporates should be doing?
Well, as I see it, the key to cracking this domestic abuse issue, which you've all been talking about today, is workplace, is employers, because that's where people are. All over the country, in large businesses, in small businesses, whatever. Most people, not all, but most people go to work. And therefore, it is absolutely critical to anything that we want to do in domestic abuse that employers are with us, are part of it, are doing it. And as many of you here today will know, you are. And that is wonderful for us. And Bright Sky is just one of the tools you can use. We've now got quite a lot of businesses that do ask all their staff to download it onto their phones. or onto their PCs, and they put it on their websites. Of course, and that's terribly important. That's very important, of course, for people who haven't thought about whether what awful thing that's happening to them is domestic abuse. So it's vital for them. It's, as everybody's been saying, just as important for anybody who wants to help or wants to identify it or what is worried about a member of staff or a colleague. And Bright Sky will give you those tools. But I suppose for me the important thing is not to think about domestic abuse in a sort of small way, not to think about it as just the people, even though we know the large numbers, who face it, or just the people, or we know, sadly, there are large numbers, who perpetrate it. We want every person in Britain to be aware of it, and the way they will become aware of it is through their workplace too. So this is not just a tool for people who are trying to deal with domestic abuse. It's also a tool for getting people educated, informed, and, I hope, acting on domestic abuse. So that's why it's so important. Of course, we would all say you do have to think about the safeguarding issues because they're there. So you do have to alert people to the fact that if they're facing domestic abuse, they want to be very careful about when they access it, and so that they don't give the perpetrator any more bricks to throw at them. So that is very important that employers do stress that, and that employees who are trying to make use of it or trying to encourage their friends and families to download Bright Sky, that they are also aware of the safeguarding matters. But really what we're about is getting everybody to act.
Thank you. Just a reminder, if you do want to put any questions in, we can actually take them. I've got them in front of me. One specifically on Vodafone, but I'm not sure if Claudine is still here. Okay. We'll miss that one, but if you have other questions, do pop them in. If I could ask each of you just as well, because I'm sure we are running close to time, if you had one thing that you would ask employers to do in the room, what would it be? Patrick, if I can start with you.
I think it's to have the conversation loudly and often.
It's a great one. I think if we're looking at a full employer response, it's to understand that actually as much as you are asking your managers, HR, employees to do this work to better understand it, it's also your job to protect them and support them too, because there is a lot of it is a heavy subject and it's difficult, and vicarious trauma is real. So the way we continue to make sustainable approaches is to make sure that we are protecting the people that you are asking to step out there and do this job, and to spot the signs and to support survivors.
I would ask employers to recognise that their workforce is full of good people who haven't been involved in domestic abuse and won't ever be involved in it either, as victims, we hope, or we hope even more as perpetrators, so that the most of their workforce will not come across this issue, we hope. But all of their workforce can do something about it. We want employers to encourage all their workforce to take on one action to try and help on domestic abuse, and they can be ever such small actions. Every man who will agree to go into their primary school and talk about healthy relationships to the top class in the primary school, that's a small thing to do. It's offering an hour. Do it. Everybody who feels they'd like to raise money for the amazing charities that are trying to do something, great. So there are lots of, and people in your companies will have imaginative ideas about what people can do. Get them to produce the ideas about what any individual can do and ask them to do it.
Fantastic. And just to build on your role as president of EIDA, one question that's just come in, and there's some really good questions which we will answer. If we don't answer them all today, we'll answer them afterwards. Is what first steps can SMEs take who don't have those huge amounts of HR resources and other resources and time internally to do this?
Get hold of Bright Sky. That'll give you the stuff that you need. And if you haven't got anybody, you as the CEO, you as the person who's responsible for recruitment, whatever you like, get hold of it and then encourage your colleagues to get hold of it. It won't cost you as a company anything, and it'll provide you with lots of resources.
Can I ask Phoebe another one that's come up? Because I think you've done a lot of the training that sits behind at least our work. What's your best advice for tackling the regional nuances of rolling out a domestic abuse response in a global company?
Oh, amazing question. So, I mean, as Claudine just said, we had the pleasure and have the continued pleasure of doing this with Vodafone. And I think the foundation of that is a really solid core educational training. And what we have found is that actually that can span over regions. That works. We work in the UK and we work across the whole of the global markets with Vodafone. So when we are looking at then rolling out across other regions, it's making sure that you have that sort of solid understanding and nuance within that training of local regions, right down to just what do people call domestic abuse. So when we're working in South Africa, we have to really make sure that we are talking about it as gender-based violence, because domestic abuse is actually a subsection within that in their legislation. So it's really important to pull from that local knowledge. And that is from within your company and also experts. And then we have the joy within our teams of working globally, so we can pull in kind of that knowledge there. So start with a really strong foundation and either find an organisation that is able to roll that out with you, bringing in those nuances, or then say, how can we take this and then localise that to each market to make sure that actually those allies, those people you're training are equipped with the relevant knowledge to be able to step out and act.
Brilliant. Well, I think we've run out of time. We will, like I say, respond to the other questions offline because they are great questions. But thank you very much to my lovely panel who have answered so effectively.